Shalom, shalom, Mishpachah. This is Jared Yao checking in. I'm out here at the fish market in Elmina. We're waiting on my fish to get cooked down the road. Just wanted to find a nice little halfway secluded spot where I could talk about the things that we've been talking about since about yesterday. But Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I know everybody's Shabbat is probably still going on. We are about an hour or so, or about 2 hours removed from our Shabbat. So Shabbat Shalom to everybody out there. Hope that you guys are having a wonderful Sabbath day. Praise Yah that we are able to keep the Sabbath day, that we have this information, and then that we have this information in surety, right? So we know that this surely is the Sabbath day because we have records going back a long time. So hallelujah that we're able to do this together on this day. But I wanted to talk about, just continuing to talk about the Holocaust and the type of event that it was, that an event that shaped really my childhood in a way that is, that overlooks a Holocaust that is also continually going on in the community, right? In our community, in the Black community, because if you are focused on another nation's Holocaust, you may miss your own, right? So this is what we're dealing with in the modern day Hebraic mindset. So we talked about yesterday the Holocaust that was hoisted upon us from 1945 to 1943 to 1945 in our portion of the war, when we discovered that there was this genocide going on in Europe, in Germany, Austria, Poland, and the world stood up and said we have to do something about it. This is when we have the Jewish state of Israel being forged in 1948, just 3 years after the close of the war, because of the seriousness of the Holocaust. Shabbat Shalom, Mishpachah. I see there's one person on here right now. So because of because of the gravity of what was found in Europe, people really were influenced in creating a state that did not belong to the people that were in it, right? You had just a convergence of concepts right there in 1948 that is able to establish in falsehood something that will go on to continue to be a false adaptation of a real prophecy, right? And so since we see the Holocaust in action, right, today in our community, we then recognize some of those same elements from the Holocaust that was in Germany, right? So if we are the Hebrews of the Bible, the question then becomes, why didn't the Holocaust happen to us, right? And then the answer is, of course, it did and is. It is still happening, right? So what we discussed yesterday, just a really brief synopsis, this is what we're going into today, the Holocaust that is, the Holocaust now. But just to summarize what we... Shabbat Shalom, hallelujah. I will listen after the set-apart Sabbath. I enjoy my time with Abba, Yah, and Yahusha, because the Ruach, which is Kodesh, placed in me by him. Hallelujah. No worries, because this one will be about mostly secular topics. Of course, everything is based on the Spirit and based on the Father and based on his will in the earth. But of course, the focus won't be on the text this time. So this is Sabbath, continuing Sabbath for you guys. And I know that that if it's not focused on the text, I wouldn't be involved in it either on Sabbath. I just want to get a couple ideas out, and I've got a little bit of time on my hands while I'm waiting on my fish to get cooked here. So I wanted to get a couple ideas out that we've been discussing, throwing around the concept of Holocaust and what it means, what it meant to me as a kid, what it the effect that it had on modern society, and what we can expect. Do you see what I'm saying? So this does all tie in together with actual Israel, and then of course this is all in the Father's will. But this will be more of a modern, historic look at the concept of Holocaust. So with that being said, we're going to discuss what we discussed yesterday, to do a really, really brief synopsis of what we got into yesterday. So a lot of people don't know, and if you want a more broken down version of this, please go check out the first video. But a lot of people don't know that in the 1800s, while the Jewish people were in diaspora, the Ashkenazi Jewish people were in a European diaspora from the failed Khazar Empire, they established in these places economic strongholds, right? So you have in Germany economic stronghold by the Ashkenazi Jews. In France, economic stronghold. In Russia, an economic stronghold. England, economic stronghold. Germany, economic stronghold. And then the subsidiary nations that were around them too. And this all comes from a particular family, the Rothschild family. And if you go into conspiratorial anything, you will have heard of the Rothschilds, but they were a real family. And they did set up banking institutions in all the major economic centers of Europe. And they were successful in this endeavor, and they used that to control the governments of these areas by, becoming so successful that you can give a loan to the government. At that time, you become the government's bank. Therefore, the government relies on you to spend anything. So therefore, you control those governments. And we see that coming into the 18th century, 19th century, the 1800s, when the Zionist movement began outright. You had a man named Theodor Herzl who began to write and publish Jewish material. We talked about Ashkenazi Jewish material, about returning to a homeland that they had never been to originally, because the biblical association with Israel as being in the land of Israel exists. And then, of course, the prophecy of them coming back one day. People like Theodor Herzl began to write and to publicly talk about a return, right? A return for the Ashkenazi Jewish people, which they knew themselves would be a falsehood, because they knew themselves not to be actual Israel. And so you, from this movement, have an anti-movement where you have Zionism begin, but you also have anti-Zionism begin. And in the beginning, Zionism was a very, very small but wealthy group of individuals that was able to, grow into this, now is the fruits of that unrighteous labor, an entire state, right? And then through that state, most of the world, if not all the world. But from, so where was I at here? From the culmination of Zionism and anti-Zionism being in contention with one another within Ashkenazi Jewry, you have a plan that was formulated to both win support for Jews being in Israel and then also eliminate their political enemies. And that plan was the Holocaust. We talked about since we know that Jewish interests controlled Germany. We know that economically Germany was controlled by Jewish interests. That's the reason for the sentiment among the German people against Ashkenazi Jews, because they understood that they economically controlled them and were squeezing them tight in the early 1900s. This is why the people were able to be, and this is not an excuse at all for, committing murder or anything like that, but this is the history behind why the German people were ripe for this particular purpose, because they had been, wronged for about 30 years based on Jewish control of Germany. In the same way that today the black community is being wrangled by Ashkenazi Judaism and people from that group of people. Back then, Germany was as well, and so the German people were upset, to say the least, right? And so what they did was they formulated this plan. Now being in control of Jerusalem, but not able to waltz into Jerusalem and cause another war, they set forth this plan for the world to place them in Jerusalem. And we know that plan was then to evacuate all of the Zionist Jews from Europe, uh, and at the same time develop a anti-Jew ideology in a man called Hitler, who we know was definitely controlled by Zionist interest. Even you can identify Zionist interest controlling Hitler and controlling his movements and controlling whether or not he's going to even win the war. There's all sorts of things going on inside the war, all sorts of moves that Hitler could have made to win, but they didn't want him to win. Why? Because, I mean, you look at, if you guys are World War II buffs, which, my father is, so I was raised kind of a World War II buff. We're a military family, so we look at these wars and analyze the wars and the reasons behind them ever since I was a kid. So if you know anything about World War II, you'll know that there were several instances when Hitler could have just won the war and would have just outright conquered Europe. And they always say that the world would be speaking German right now. So why? Why wouldn't he take these measures? He was a military guy and understood uh, military tactics in order to get to where he was, in order to be as successful as he was. Why didn't he just do these particular things? Why didn't he, there's one instance in particular that you guys may be familiar with, D-Day, with the D-Day invasion of France. It appears that the entire thing was staged to be what it was, right? There was beaches with no resistance whatsoever, where people just were United States forces. You guys know about D-Day. It's Normandy, France, when America joined the war in Europe and invaded France through Normandy Beach. And if you've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, you'll know that in some places it was a bloodbath where people were just getting chopped up. But what you don't know is that in other places, you just walked onto the beach with no resistance whatsoever, pop shots here and there. You actually had a colonel who was later on outed for saying that he was at D-Day and survived all this treacherous combat, when in actuality he was on one of the safe beaches, right? So they had safe beaches and unsafe beaches that they knew about before the invasion. They knew which places would have heavy coverage and which places wouldn't. That's why the colonel was able to differentiate which one he was going to. So that he could later talk about how much of a brave soldier he was, right? So they knew this. The American side knew this going in. But the German side also knew something else. Apparently, Hitler had a panzer division, a tank division, that was stationed very near to Normandy Beach. And apparently Hitler had intel saying that this invasion was coming. So if Hitler would have stationed his panzer division at the beach, along with the guns and along with the sentrymen that were there, they would have just blown the invasion off of the beach. There would have been no chance that the Americans could have landed on the beach. But what it appears is that Hitler allowed the Americans to land on the beach, which means that, okay, I enjoy all your teachings, hallelujah, for they are not your teachings but his. That's right. Brothers like you keep brothers learned and strong. I wanted to say hello while you were alive. I pray Abba crosses our paths. Hallelujah, brother. Let's make that happen. I'm out here in Ghana. You guys come find me. We are out here in the American uh, Jew diaspora, and we are out here trying to make it. Let me tell you, we're out here in Ghana right now, so we're in the African leg. If you guys make it out here, come holler at me. Um, but let's go ahead and continue where we were at. So, what um, um, what Hitler didn't do tells you a lot about what they knew and what they could control in the war itself, because it made more sense for for Hitler to not win the war against America and against Europe, because that would then push that anti quote unquote anti-Semitism worldwide and establish an empire based on that, and therefore they wouldn't have been able to survive in America either, or in any other place either. You wouldn't have been able to establish the state of Israel with the with a conquering Nazi empire. So they then were used as this, basically nation of mercenaries to partake in this undertaking of destroying the political enemies of the Zionists in Israel. If I could just really cut to the chase, that's basically what it was. And you can tell by the way that the war went, you can tell by the way that the events after the war happened, how only 3 years later the state of Israel was established. And then you can tell by the subsequent events and the control of history to happen after the fact. And then with that being said, you have to then recognize that Israel is willing to destroy its own people to get something done. And we wouldn't have known that. We would have had to just assume this to be the case if it wasn't for October 7th of this year, right? So we only find out, of course, we who are Israelites, who are Hebrews, who study these things, and we live according to a certain amount of knowledge that maybe everybody else hasn't dug into and got. Not to say that we put ourselves above anybody else, but this information that is hidden from the rest of the world is known, well known in the Israelite community. So what we, as a public people, didn't know, the people that aren't a part of Israel and actual Israel, and that have done the research, what we didn't know, if we're feigning ignorance, I speak as a man right now, what men didn't know was that Israel was willing to sacrifice itself for a cause. But we now know that, I speak as a man, we now know that because of October 7th and because of the news that has come out of October 7th since then, that the helicopters that were responding to the terrorist threat ended up killing more Israeli civilians than the terrorists did, that the helicopters weren't distinguishing between Israelites, quote unquote Ashkenazi Israelites, and terrorists, right? That they were killing everybody, and that up to 1,000 of the 1,200 people that died on October 7th were killed by IDF, were killed by Israeli forces. And that is still not stopping them from using this event as a means to enter into Gaza and wipe them off the face of the planet. We see that, we know that is happening now. There are people that are getting blown apart right now for a cause we know is mostly caused by the IDF themselves. Do you see what I'm saying? As people who are following the media, and people who recognize and only utilize the media as their source of information, those people now know that Israel is willing to destroy itself for political purposes, right? They now know of what's called the Samson option, which is, again, the concept of Israel as a wartime strategy of using its own citizens as bait and as casualties inflicted by them in order to to continue to wage war. It's called the Samson option, and it's an option that they used on October 7th, and this is provably so in the media that we have today. In the mainstream media, it's provably so that these Ashkenazi Jews were willing to sacrifice their own people for political gain. And this is just a sliver of Israel. Do you see what I'm saying? That allows us to recognize that 60 years ago, 80 years ago in World War II, that they did the same thing, that they sacrificed the non-Zionists, the anti-Zionists, in order to get into Jerusalem by using that as a sacrifice, right? And even the term Holocaust means whole burnt offering. It's hollow, which is whole, cost, and I believe this is Latin. Cost is caustic or burnt, burning, right? And so Holocaust is a whole burnt, and that means a whole burnt offering, right? Now, of course, that's what they did with the bodies. The Nazis actually incinerated the bodies in incinerators that ran 24/7. So this literally was a cremated um, uh, genocide, a genocide that where the bodies were cremated, and thus fulfilling the name of Holocaust. Do you see what I mean? So we then know that this was the tactic that they used. So we then know what a Holocaust looks like by this, right? We know that there are certain elements of a Holocaust, of a genocide, by what they did to themselves or what happened to them, or however you want to look at it. But so, can we identify these same markings on the real Jews, right? That was the question that's asked initially. If we are the real Jews, why didn't the Holocaust happen to us, right? And so we look and we see at the nature of our captivity, the Holocaust for sure happened to us. You could look at every era and find a Holocaust. Do you understand what I mean? The Israelites that are the ones that are actual, that are in captivity in America to this day, have experienced a Holocaust in every generation. You could look at the you guys hear that noise. If y'all heard that noise, there was a pig behind me eating in this place over here. A pig just came out of the bushes. That's what that noise was, a pig. So I don't know what that means, but that was a pig. What was I talking about? So in every generation, a Holocaust has happened to our people, right? A Holocaust has happened. So we know in the first generation that the Holocaust was in West Africa, was here among the people that were here when we were sold by the people to the Europeans. We know that if we follow the history, that 200 years earlier, there was an additional Holocaust called the Inquisition. And we won't talk about that one right now, but we want to talk about the modern aspect of our captivity, which mimics the 4-year Holocaust of the Ashkenazi Jews in Germany. That's the goal here. That's what we're getting to. All the elements that you know of from a Holocaust happened to us in America in multiple generations and on multiple fronts, right? So we know that we were sent in captivity to West Africa, and we weren't in a captivity in West Africa. We were expelled from Portugal and Spain and sent down here where I am right now. And while we were here, we created wealth. Somehow we survived in this place and we began to create wealth and began to be wealthy. It says that there were wealthy Jews on both sides of the River Niger and that they were hated. We were hated by the nations that were around us, the Africans that were here. And it's similar today, but not all the way. So we are still recognizing that we are in a land of Gentiles here, with some Hebrews sprinkled in, and it's very similar to where we were. Um, so, with that being said, here in West Africa, we experienced the first leg of the genocide by the slavers coming to capture us in West Africa and then resell us to the Europeans, and experiencing the Holocaust that surely was the transatlantic slave trade journey across the ocean, losing millions of people in the process, ethnically cleansing a group of people, and then putting them in life-threatening, life-endangering slavery. So, you see on the other side, so rigorously so that the skeletons that they find in these mass graves in places like New York, where they found mass graves, in places where you wouldn't expect there to be, massive slavery and massive working. They found, of course, in Mississippi and in Georgia and Tennessee and all these types of places, but in New York too, in Jamaica too, right? They found skeletons where they can tell that the sockets were out of place. Do you see what I'm saying? That the way that the socket sat in the arm was out of joint or irregular. And what they've suggested this means, they found enough of these, what they've suggested that this means is that these men were worked until their bones and muscles just gave way, and that once they injured themselves severely, were killed and thrown in a mass grave. This is the type of captivity that we're talking about happened in America, if you understand what I mean. This is a severe captivity, a captivity to rival all other captivities that happened in America on the shores of the land of the free, if you guys understand what I'm saying. And so we go on from that. We go on from that moment to the so-called freedom of the slaves in 1864, 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation comes out, and the slaves, our ancestors, were freed from this severe Holocaust, this severe captivity that by this time had existed for 200 years and intensified to utterly barbaric standards in the last 100 years of that 200 years, right? And so we recognize that that at that time we were then freed, and maybe we don't recognize how quickly after this freedom we gained an economic and educational foothold in America. Most people won't know that after in 1864, when the slaves were freed in mass, of course it took a while for the message of freedom to get out around the nation. But once it did, people began to accept the saying is that, oh, people stayed on the plantations, that once they were freed, they just swapped over their slavery for sharecropping. No, that did not happen. People recognized themselves as being free and began to group together and make free towns. This is the nature of the freedom in the late 1800s. People will tell you that people accepted their captivity and continued on as things were. By and large, that did not happen. There may have been that to happen in some communities, in small efforts, but by and large, that's not the way that it went down. It actually was the exact opposite, that people took this freedom and began to change their surroundings, began to group together in towns and communities, began to pool their money, and began to become educated. Even in the town that I'm from, you had black colleges, and I'm from not a small town, but a small city. You begin to have black colleges. You begin to see the first generation of black doctors, black lawyers, black bankers. In the 1880s, you start to have a wealthy middle class black community. Do you understand that 17 years after the freedom of the slaves, we became middle class? Middle and upper class, because there were pillars of the community that went out, became wealthy, and created their own communities People like Madam C.J. Walker, people like the guy that started, what was it, Rosewood, people that started Selma. All of these communities that were wealthy communities and thriving communities, and communities that not only rivaled their white neighbors, but exceeded them. That's what you guys don't understand. We had began to take over America in the first generation after slavery. There was nothing that they could do except for instill an additional Holocaust. And so we recognize that at this time, this is when the Ku Klux Klan was formed, right? This is when, at the turn of the 20th century, in the 1900s, we start to see the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. We start to see the rise of all of these groups that are secretive and that are racist. We start to see the rise of these lynch mobs and these race riots. People don't recognize that these lynch mobs would go out and kill, destroy, burn down whole towns. That there are mass graves that they find, all over the country where hundreds of bodies are found in these mass graves. There are lakes and streams, not streams, but lakes and dams and rivers set up that wash away whole towns. Do you understand that TVA, I'm from Tennessee, TVA established this is what the movie, if you've seen the movie Oh Brother Where Art Thou, where at the end of the movie TVA floods this plain to make way for this new damming system. There are lakes and dams all over the country that are covering up black middle class to upper class towns. There was a Holocaust that happened in the United States that they're covering up. You guys don't recognize that the Germans said that they got the concept and the blueprint for the Holocaust from America. Do you see what I'm saying? In the turn of the century, the early 1900s, you had a fully operational black middle class that was nationwide, that was educated, that formed their own universities and institutions. You had black doctors, black lawyers, black bankers, black postal service, black fire department, black incorporation. Do you see what I'm saying? When you have a town that's an incorporated town, that's what I mean. You had black cities that were meccas of economic achievement, right? Cities that outweighed white cities, that something had to be done. And the first thing that they did was develop the Ku Klux Klan, that they could come in and wipe these towns out, burn them to the ground, push all the inhabitants out. The next thing they did was establish this TVA lake, the TVA Tennessee Valley Authority, where they run all the dams in Tennessee, but not just in Tennessee, in all these places. Where they started flooding whole huge areas where these towns used to be. You guys have heard of the the Tartarian conspiracy. Maybe you guys have heard of it, where there was some sort of mud flood that wiped out an advanced civilization that existed in America and all over the world in the early or the late 1800s. Well, guess what, y'all? We're talking about the Jewish American Renaissance. That when we were freed from slavery, we had to be stopped. And these towns that we developed were all flooded. And the people were all killed. And this was wiped out from the history of America. We see this as a successful Holocaust that happened in America because we don't even know about it. There was an era of prosperity for the Hebrew people in the late 1800s, and it was destroyed. It was attacked. Rosewood was not the only city that it happened to. It happened to all the black cities and towns. It happened to them all. Do you understand? This pushed all the black people that were in the country building their own towns into the cities. Where in the cities, they then had these projects to go right into, or these ghettos to go into at first, then this government project system where, glad I can catch some of this. It's almost like night is a code word. All these orders seem to use that term. Even KKK is the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. That's absolutely right. Like, you guys will have heard of the Knights of Columbus too. Do you see what I'm saying? These are all like fraternal organizations that utilize these different terms. And the knights that they are really, of course, the Knights Templars, the people of the Crusades that raided Jerusalem and took all the treasures out of Jerusalem, including the secrets. And then you see after, the Crusades, when Europeans start to get this information about the world, start to understand that there's land on the other side, right? That in the Americas there's land, because they read Second Esdras, right? And then they start to expand and utilize this knowledge to take over the world, right? This is what we see in history. So excellent contribution, Sarah. That's absolutely correct. Um, so when we have in the turn of the 20th century, we have the Holocaust of Black America, the Holocaust of Jewish America, Black Jewish America, where the institutions that we established in the first and second generations after slavery, when there were no institutions against us at that time, the institutions that we established became profitable and made a wealthy minority class in America that was wiped out. What we wanted to say is that there was a mud flood that people keep talking about in the conspiracy community. People keep talking about the mud flood that wiped out this advanced civilization in America that they're not telling us about. This is that the Hebrews of America developed an entire civilization in the early 1900s and late 1800s that they destroyed using the Ku Klux Klan and using Jim Crow laws, using the police department, and then all sorts of other like mob violence and even the Air Force with Tulsa, in the instance of Tulsa, right? Because you had communities there that were thriving, that were successful. If you don't literally curse us, the Father on us will be successful, will make us successful. Do you see what I'm saying? And it's not like a racist thing or a bigoted thing to say that somehow we're better or smarter or faster or anything like that. We're just so happen to be the people that were blessed by Yah, and because of that, we have this shine on us that's going to be profitable. That's why we were taken as slaves to begin with, because the people that took us knew that they would be profitable just by having us. And they were. So much so that America became the most wealthy and greatest nation on the planet, right? And so in that first generation that came after the Emancipation Proclamation, the first and second generation, we made a mini America, right? A quote unquote New Jerusalem in the middle class that came up in that era. And it was destroyed in this mud flood, this unknown Holocaust that happened to our people at that time period, forcing us into the cities, into slums, and then with the only solution appearing to be public housing. And when the New Deal, when FDR made the New Deal, got all this funding to vastly redesign all the urban areas in the entire country. You have to understand how many millions and billions of dollars this must have done, because there's a project in every city. There's 5 projects in every city, at least in my city where I'm from. And I'm from a town of less than 200,000 people. There's 5, 6, 7 projects in my city, right? Before they got torn down. So this is a massive undertaking that all happened within the time period of the 30s and the 60s, right? In that 30 years, you have this, and I know FDR with the New Deal was in the 40s, but you have 30 years of infrastructure redevelopment that sweeps across the entire country, right? And so this has to be a plan. And so what you see here is the concentration camp system of America being put into play. This is the proofs that what happened to the Jews in Europe, the false Ashkenazi Jews in Europe, is happening to us, actual Jews, now. So we're put in these concentration camps, not put there like by force, but psychologically driven into the camps because, quote unquote, they were made for white people to experience a level up so that they wouldn't have to pay any rent and be able to save their money and then go out and move to the suburbs, which is exactly what happened, which is what American Jew Part 1 is about. And so that next generation of projects, black people saw the success of white people coming out of the projects, saw how nice the projects looked, because they looked nice back then, and then moved in by droves. And all the projects became all black, and then the trap was set. Because there were no suburbs at that point available for black people to move into. Remember, they had been moved into the city 2 generations earlier out of the suburbs that they created. By the time the 40s and the 50s and the 60s come around, those suburbs are all taken over by white people at that time. And then now they could be excluded. And oops, now you're in the city, let's pull the businesses out of the city. Now you're in an economic time bomb. And that economic time bomb created a ghetto. So the policies of housing in the 40s and 50s created the American ghetto. People are claiming like the street or this hood is better than this hood, when the entire time the reason that you're from the hood is because America created it for you to be in. Do you understand what I'm saying? Before you were from the hood, you created your own suburbs. That's what people don't understand. People are so proud of their hood. Why don't you be proud of the town that you made yourself? You see what I'm saying? And it had to be done this way because, of course, we didn't have the Father back then. We weren't keeping the commandments back then. We didn't know who we were enough to even do those things. So we're still, have to be products of the curses. And the curses are still hoisted upon us. And our people are still brought down because of our own actions. But this is the action that's happening. This is what the curse looks like, right? We see the concentration camp system in Europe, and we recognize it for what it is, a concentration camp system. We don't see it in America, and we don't recognize it for what it is today as a concentration camp system. Do you see what I'm saying? As of right now, psychologically, you have people in America that are stuck in the concentration camps. You have people that, and here's the other part about it. The same experimentation, the same, Holocaust-style means of death that they're inflicting upon, that they inflicted, the Nazis did, upon the non-Zionist Jews that they caught in Germany, are the same style of tortures that they're doing to people in the projects now. They're infecting them with chemical warfare, drugs, putting guns into the community so that they can kill each other, right? Putting heroin in the community, crack into the community. Do you see what I'm saying? These things are put in the community because people in the projects don't have a means to have ships to bring in tons of heroin, tons of cocaine. No. It has to be dropped off there. And when it's dropped off there, okay, now you have an incubator that's unpoliced in order to make that happen. We know that the projects are unpoliced because we have the blueprint for it. And guess what show, you guys? One of the most racist and Nazi shows to ever come out. And you guys not gonna believe this, but a Nazi show that tells you how the projects are unpoliced. It's The Wire. The Wire gives away the game. They tell what Amsterdam, I know you guys have seen The Wire from beforehand. Now, I don't promote, if you haven't seen The Wire, I don't promote you going out and watching it. It's a vulgar show. It's a show that's, that shows the wildness of the streets, the wildness of the cops, and it uses, all sorts of profanity, all sorts of wickedness in it. So before we were deep in the truth, of course, we got into The Wire and looked at it as oh, this is a real street show right here. This is the show, that we've been needing. But no, of course, it's not that. It's a depiction of the captivity on its basic levels of how they captivate and make prisoner our people. That's what the show is about. That's how they get us. It's about the trap. Do you see what I'm saying? That's what The Wire is about. And they show us the trap by showing in the third season where they had the Amsterdam, where there was no rules, where you could sell drugs in peace. That's all projects. All projects are Amsterdam. They pick and choose who they want to arrest. The rest they just let sell drugs. Because why not? The only reason, look, they said the only reason they're down there is because of the killings. And they don't mind the killings either. It just looks bad. But as far as the drugs go, that's hand in hand. That's the way that it goes. This is the poisoning of the population. And they have to do this because they have an example that if they don't, we'll build a middle and upper class and we'll take over the country. It's just the facts. That's the only reason that you would have to continually enslave a people. You have to look into the past and see that there have been a continual cycle of Holocaust to happen to the people, to the Hebrews of America, to the black Jews of America, to the hidden ones of America. All right? We're right at 46 minutes. If there's no questions about this topic, just to really summarize, what we were talking about is the concept of Holocaust in the 40s and 50s, in the 40s with Nazi Germany, and then the application of Holocaust in America, even going beforehand, right? The actual Holocaust that has been continual through America on the actual Jews. Do you see what I'm saying? How you can compare and contrast the two different styles of Holocaust, identifying the genocidal Holocaust by what happened in Europe with the non-Zionist Ashkenazim, and then seeing that has gone forth in America. Do you guys hear these pigs back here? There's a herd of pigs behind me. That this has gone forth in America. I'm finna walk down here. That this has gone forth in America from before all the way up until the current day. And this is so wild, y'all, that I'm choosing the one place where there's all of these pigs behind me. So I'm finna get on out of here. I don't know if some sort of sign or I don't know what that means, but we're gonna go ahead and get on out of here. The fish is up here. I'm sure it's ready by now. Hey, I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Jerry, Greg, shalom, shalom. I hope our paths do cross there, brother. And then Sarah, I appreciate you for being on too, Sarah. You definitely have provided some real insight in my understanding about things by just hearing your story and, knowing who you are and knowing the type of follower you are is definitely enlightened me in many different ways. So I appreciate you guys for being on. Shalom, shalom. It looks like somebody else has come on here. We're getting ready to close up shop here. I appreciate you all. Blessings and peace. Shalom, shalom.